The first sound came through the studio speaker and Stevie Wonder stopped playing. His hands left the keys of the piano. He turned his head slowly toward the sound. The way he always does. The way he has always done. The way a man listens when his entire world is made of what he hears. Jimmy Fallon watched from across the desk. He saw it happen. He could not speak. And for 11 seconds, nobody in Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza made a single sound. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon was exactly where it always was. Cameras in position. The band in their places. The house packed with 300 people who had waited in line since that morning. Stevie Wonder was there to perform his new single and sit for an interview. He had done this before. He had done everything before. 60 years of stages, of studios, of interviews, of performances. He had been doing this since before most of the people in that room were born. He settled onto the piano bench with the ease of a man arriving home, and the audience responded the way they always do when a legend appears in front of them. Everything was going perfectly. Jimmy was loose and easy that night. The kind of night where the conversation flows without effort. Where the guest is generous and the audience is warm, and the cameras seem to disappear. Stevie was funny. He was sharp. He told a story about a recording session that had the entire room laughing. Questlove was nodding from behind the drum kit, tapping his stick softly against his thigh. The camera operators were smiling behind their viewfinders. The band was swaying gently the way musicians do when they are listening to someone who understands music from the inside out. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair the way he does when he is genuinely having a good time, not performing having a good time. There was something easy in the air that night. Something settled. There was a small cassette player sitting on the desk between them. Stevie had not asked about it. Jimmy had not mentioned it. A producer had placed it there before the taping. She was the only one in the building who knew why it was there, or where it had come from. Then, about 12 minutes into the interview, Jimmy reached for it. The first sound came through the studio speaker and Stevie Wonder stopped playing. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1962. Stevie Wonder wasn't always Stevie Wonder. Icon and legend and voice of a generation. In 1962, he was 12 years old. He had been signed to Motown for 1 year. He had one single, a live recording of a Miracles song, that had climbed to number 1 on the R&B charts and number 5 on the pop charts. He was a child, still in almost every way that mattered. Talented in a way that made adults go quiet when they heard him. But still a child who had never seen a football game or a sunset or the face of his own mother. That fall, Motown sent him on a small promotional tour through the Midwest. Not stadiums, record stores, radio stations. A few small theaters and church halls where people could sit close enough to see his face. In October 1962, he performed at a community center in Columbus, Ohio. Maybe 200 seats. The kind of room where sound bounces off the back wall and comes straight back at you. He remembers the smell of it, old wood and floor wax and something sweet he could never identify. Something someone had been cooking in the kitchen at the back of the building. A woman named Dorothy Haynes was sitting in the 4th row. She was 31 years old. She taught music at an elementary school 3 miles away. She had heard the single on the radio 4 months earlier, driving home from school on a Thursday afternoon, and she had pulled her car to the side of the road and sat there listening with her hands in her lap. She had come to the performance alone. Her husband had thought it was a strange thing to drive 40 minutes to watch a child perform at a community center. She had come anyway. After the show, Dorothy waited. She was not the type of person who pushed her way toward the front. She was not the type of person who demanded anything. But she had brought a small cassette recorder with her, a Norelco portable, the kind that had just begun to appear in American households that year, and she had recorded the entire performance from the 4th row. She waited until nearly everyone else had left. And then she introduced herself to the young man sitting at the piano, still running his fingers across the keys, still listening to the room the way he always listened to a room after a performance. She said something to him that night. Something she had noticed, sitting in the fourth row listening. She said she could hear him feeling for the edges of the music. She said most musicians she had listened to in her life played the notes that were written. She said he was playing the notes that weren't there yet. She said she was a music teacher, and in 20 years of teaching she had never heard a 12-year-old boy do that. She said it plainly, without fanfare, the way a person states an obvious truth they expect you already know. Stevie Wonder was quiet for a moment. The room was empty by then. Just the two of them and the old wood smell and the floor wax, and that unidentified sweetness from the kitchen. Then he said, very carefully, no one had ever said it that way before. She pressed the cassette recorder into his hands. She told him she had recorded the performance. She told him she wanted him to have it so he could hear himself the way she had heard him. He held the small plastic rectangle in both hands, and turned it over slowly, feeling its shape. He asked her name. She told him. He said, Dorothy. He said, I will not forget this. She drove home through the Ohio dark. She never heard from him again. She did not expect to. The world moved the way the world moves. Careers and decades and the particular acceleration of a life lived forward without looking back. She told the story to her students for the next 30 years. The night she told a boy from Detroit that he was playing the notes that weren't there yet. The students would lean forward when she told it. They were 8 and 9 years old, sitting at small desks, and they listened with the total attention that children give to stories they sense are true. She kept teaching. Her students went on to play in orchestras, in jazz clubs, in church choirs, in high school gymnasiums on Tuesday evenings in front of 30 parents holding phones. She retired in 1994 and kept a small upright piano in her living room and played every morning until her hands made it difficult. She never asked for anything from that night. Never tried to find him. Never wrote a letter to his management company, or called a radio station, or reached out through any of the 1,000 channels that opened up over the decades as the world got smaller, and a person in Columbus could theoretically have found a way. She had given him the cassette, and she had gone home, and that was, she believed, exactly enough. In the spring of this year, Dorothy Haynes was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her 5 months, maybe 6. She was 92 years old. She was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of one thing, that a story she had told for 60 years would disappear, when she did. Her daughter, a woman named Carol who lives outside Columbus and works as a high school principal, sat with her mother through 3 rounds of chemotherapy, and listened to the story again. And then she did something her mother had not asked her to do. She wrote a letter to The Tonight Show. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Jimmy Fallon had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. When Carol's letter arrived and was passed up through 3 layers of staff to his desk, he read it twice. He called the executive producer. He said, "Find out if she has the original recording." Carol sent a digital transfer of the cassette, the Norelco recording from the 4th row of a community center in Columbus, Ohio, in October 1962. 62 years of tape hiss and room noise, and the voice of a 12-year-old boy playing the notes that weren't there yet. Stevie Wonder's team was contacted quietly. A single question was asked: would he be willing? The answer came back within 4 hours. The cassette player was placed on the desk before the taping. Dorothy Haynes had passed away 11 days earlier. Carol was seated in the 4th row of Studio 6B, which had 296 fewer seats than she needed, but felt, she said later, like the same kind of room. Now, on the Tonight Show stage, Stevie Wonder and a small cassette player sat in the same frame. And the sound coming through the studio speaker was the sound of a room in Columbus, Ohio, in 1962, and a 12-year-old boy finding the notes that weren't there yet. The entire studio froze. Stevie Wonder had gone completely still. His hands were in his lap. His head was turned toward the speaker. Jimmy Fallon was watching him. The audience had stopped moving. Questlove's drumsticks were resting against his knee. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Because Stevie Wonder began to cry. Not quietly. Not the polite, controlled kind of tears that happen on television when someone is trying to remain professional. His shoulders were shaking. One hand came up slowly and covered his mouth. Jimmy Fallon was already out of his chair. He walked around the desk without saying anything and stood next to the piano bench and put his hand on Stevie Wonder's shoulder and stayed there. The recording kept playing. 62 years of tape hiss filled Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Nobody moved. Nobody cut to commercial. Carol was crying in the fourth row. She had her mother's small photograph in her hand. Dorothy Haynes at 31 years old, sitting at a piano, taken the year before she drove 40 minutes to a community center in Columbus to tell a boy he was playing the notes that weren't there yet. When the recording ended, Stevie Wonder sat for a long moment with his hand over his mouth. Then he said, very quietly, so that his microphone barely caught it, "I kept it." He said, "I kept the cassette." He said, "I listened to it so many times the tape started to drag. I had it transferred when I was 20. I never knew her last name." He stopped. "Then, I have been looking for her name for 60 years. Jimmy Fallon's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. He said, "Her name was Dorothy Haynes. She was a music teacher. She passed away 11 days ago. And her daughter is here tonight." Stevie Wonder turned toward the audience. Carol stood up from the fourth row. And Jimmy Fallon said, very quietly, into his microphone, "Folks, some things can't be planned. Some things just need to happen." And then he walked down from the stage and stood in the aisle while Carol walked toward the front. And when she reached the stage, Stevie Wonder reached out both hands and held hers and said, "Your mother told me I was playing the notes that weren't there yet. I have been chasing those notes my entire life. She is why." Questlove stood up from the drum kit. He was crying. The camera operators did not cut away. Jimmy Fallon was openly sobbing, standing in the aisle of his own studio, not trying to stop, not trying to manage it, just standing there in the middle of something real. The audience, 300 strangers in folding chairs at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, were holding each other's hands. Stevie Wonder turned back to the piano. He played one song. No introduction. No announcement. He played it the way Dorothy Haynes had described it 62 years ago, reaching for the notes that weren't there yet. The audience did not applaud. They listened in the kind of silence that is its own form of reverence. Jimmy Fallon stood in the aisle with his hand over his heart. After the cameras stopped, Carol sat with Stevie Wonder on the stage for 40 minutes while the crew packed up around them. She showed him the photograph. Her mother at 31, at the piano. He held it in both hands and ran his thumb along the edge. He asked what kind of music her mother had loved. Carol said, she loved everything. But mostly she loved the notes that weren't there yet. He laughed, and the laugh was the kind that comes after grief, soft and full at the same time. He asked if he could keep the photograph. Carol said yes. 3 months later, a small upright piano was delivered to Carol's school in Columbus, Ohio. A card was attached. It said, "For the music teachers who hear what the rest of us are still learning to hear." It was not signed, but Carol knew. She placed it in the music room, where her students use it every day. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of Dorothy Haynes's death, Jimmy Fallon plays a recording of that night backstage before the show. He has told his producers he does not want it on the schedule. He does not announce it. He just plays it. And then he walks out and does the show. Because some things happen in front of cameras that were never meant for cameras. Because a music teacher sat in the fourth row and said what she heard and drove home, and believed that was exactly enough. Because the notes that aren't there yet are the only ones worth spending a lifetime chasing. And sometimes it takes 62 years for the music to find its way home.